short video on paper tape. Most of the time on repairs, I like to use fiberglass mesh tapes, but there are times that I like to use this paper tape. Paper tape, you have to use a regular joint compound. You have to let it dry overnight before you can do a second coat. You can use a hot muds, but it's best to use a joint compound with these paper tapes. I like to use these paper tapes around pipes, tight areas where you need to tape it nice and tight, especially around pipes. I know a lot of areas per code when they're getting house inspections around pipes, especially in garages and stuff like that, they don't like gaps around the pipes. So you got to paper tape around these pipes really tight. No gaps around the pipes. So a simple tear tape method like this, you just take your paper tape and you can just cut the size you need. I just rip it, tear it. That's why it's called the tear tape. Around pipes, you can just notch it so your pipe fits perfectly. You get all your tear tape areas ready, and then you can have them ready to go before you start dipping them in mud. You don't want to make a mess right away, so let's do all the easy tear tapes now before we get our hands covered in mud. I'm just practicing on a scrap piece of drywall here because most of the jobs I do, I use fiberglass, but I got asked a question on how to fix around pipes. So I'm just doing a simple video on tear tape techniques. Most of these angle stops, ideal world, you don't want to, if you have to tape around angle stops, tear tape is your best method because when they cut the sheetrock, they had to make the hole bigger. So now you have to fill in the gap. And sometimes it's hard to get a little piece of drywall. If you can get a little scrap piece of drywall in that gap, go ahead and do it. But you can just do this tear tape method. Any holes in the wall, you know, like hammer holes and stuff like that, 1-inch holes, you can also tape over those holes. You'd be surprised what tape can do. This is the mud. I'm using a joint compound out of the bucket. It's not too thin. You don't want thin mud. You want pretty thick mud, like a heavy pancake batter. Basically, your pieces that you already did a tear tape, you can just dip them in the mud and then put them in your pan so they're ready to go. You don't need a lot of mud, but you want to make sure you have enough mud to cover the back of the tape. You're just dipping it in the mud, dipping it in. We're trying to keep the mess down to a minimum and keep it as simple as possible. Sometimes it's easier to just do this method instead of just smearing mud all over the place and making a big mess. You are hand taping by hand, so it is messy. Here's another technique. Sometimes you could take the actual paper tape. A lot of people like to put mud on the wall, but you could, if you don't have a banjo or special tools, you can actually dip it in the bucket like this. I'm just dipping the tape in the bucket and I'm taking off the extra mud. I don't want a bunch of mud dripping off my tape. I just want enough mud to coat the back of the tape. Any extra mud, you could just squeegee it off, get the excess off, and you cut pieces that you need in your pan so you have ready to go. I've done this technique more than once. This is for hand taping tight areas, little areas where you just want to push the tape on the wall and you don't want to sit there and smear mud on the wall, put the tape on the wall, smear it. So this is an easy hand taping technique. Like I said, this is a scrap piece of drywall. I'm just showing you a basic thing to do here. These tear tapes that we already dipped in our mud, they're ready to go. You can just put them in the area right over your gaps and just push them down the wall and just push them down. If you need to add extra pieces, go ahead. Sometimes one piece to cover is good enough. If the gap's pretty big, you might have to do 1 or 2 pieces. It doesn't matter. You're taping up the area and making a nice tight seal. That's all you're doing. I've seen guys do this around pipes, AC ductwork, vents, you name it. Sometimes we have to go into jobs and we have to fire tape and tape around everything to make everything nice and tight. But this is just a demonstration. Like I said, there's a patch hole over here, hammer hole. If you didn't want to go through the trouble of actual patching up the hole, you can just tape right over it. Once you get your tapes, go ahead and just slick it out. What the rule of thumb on taping is you start halfway on the tape and you go one way and then you go the other way. You're just trying to get off the extra mud. You're not going to get all the mud out of it. It doesn't have to be really, really tight. The more the better. But this is a joint compound, so it is going to shrink back overnight. So you just let it shrink back. If there's any goobers on it the next day, just lightly scrape the goobers, and then you can turn around and first coat. But you always want to let the tape set up before you first coat over it. Holes like this, just double tape right over it, covers it. Use your 6-inch knife. Anything, gaps. This pipe, them just goofy pipes sticking here. We don't need that pipe. Let's get rid of that pipe. Just tape over it, whatever you have to do. You can do a lot with this paper tape. Everybody wonders why drywall mudders are called tapers. This is why we're called tapers, because we tape with this tape. We tape. We tape sheetrock, we fire tape. Basically, this would be called a fire taping method, where you're just taping all your pipes nice and tight, any areas. But this is just a basic hand taping technique using regular paper tape and a regular joint compound. It's a simple technique you can do. The most times I've seen it are usually around angle stops. Angle stops are like these valves. They're under sinks, around toilets, stuff like that, where they want to tape it nice and tight. But this is a simple video on how to hand tape doing paper tear tape method with regular joint compound. You could tape some pretty big gaps with these paper tapes, holes, anything. So you'd be surprised once this dries and shrinks back, it'll be a patch, and you just put a first coat, second coat over it, and you'll never see it again. Alright, but just simple video, just doing it on a scrap piece of drywall, just showing you guys basic tip here on paper taping. Hey, please subscribe and like. I'm going to have many videos coming along. Thank you.